Well, hello. Hello. Well, we're back, and here I am, and here's Tatiana producing and recording. This is our next recording session. They use that in the music industry, as you know. Anyway, I was talking about pleasure moments and how much could be accomplished, and there's no danger to either the auditor, that's the person who listens, or the pre-clear, that's the person who isn't clear yet. And I'm going to explain what clear means and where that came from. But you can't really get into any trouble running or working with pleasure moments. The kind of trouble that practitioners, auditors, other people have gotten into when they cross that frontier that's just behind the eyes that Ron Hubbard referred to as the terra incognito, or the unknown land. When you get back of that into the mind, wherever that is, it's possible to get temporarily fouled up, but even then, if things are going badly and you just stop and don't do anything for the next, say, 72 hours, the person will pretty much return to normal, unless you're a psychiatrist and you're using drugs and shock treatment and other, maybe cutting the frontal lobes of the brain off. That doesn't get taken care of in 72 hours. And we don't think of that as being a very brilliant approach to fixing a person up, separating, cutting into their brain, or hitting it with heavy jolts of electricity, or other things that would be called engrams themselves, and that are pretty tough to deal with. Anyway, that's not a pleasure area. So let's say that you've had a lot of success with pleasure moments, and while you're working with a person on recovering pleasure moments, which of course are moments when the person is really feeling like their survival is in a good place, it is not uncommon for the person to say, it's a funny thing, but I actually don't feel like I'm in my body at the moment. I feel like I'm bigger than the body, or I feel like my space, which has always been pretty much defined by my limits of my body, I feel like my space is enormous. In fact, it is. So you can run into phenomena that are quite pleasant, where the person feels safe enough and themselves enough to actually get a sense of space, their own space getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's absolutely wonderful. If that occurs, that's a good time to just let the person have that experience and perhaps end off and find someone else to work with for a while, because that person has reached a point that is most desirable in both Dianetics and Scientology, which is, for better or for worse, they've become conscious of themselves as something more than the body. Maybe not more than the body, but at least larger than the body. Something that isn't material. A feeling of just being nothing, but a very happy nothing. A very big, spacious nothing with a sense of tremendous expansion. By the way, which will make the body feel good too. Because it may be that the person has become so compressed into the different areas of the body that they're not doing as well as they might have. So yeah, if working on pleasure moments, the person starts saying, I feel big. I feel very big. In fact, I keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That's a good time to not interrupt them, but when they're sort of like, well, I'm doing really well now, bye. That's all for now. And then that would be the time to take your next client or your next person to work with, and don't try to sell this person anything or talk about what you're going to do in the future, anything. Just let them have that experience. And they won't forget that they had that experience in connection with you, a friend, a lover, a parent, a brother, whatever you are to that person. They'll never forget that you helped them to this moment, and that's a lot of pay right there. Okay, now let's say you've worked with a person on pleasure moments. In fact, I've gotten so big I don't know if I can carry on, but that's what happens if you're around Tatiana. You're going to find your space getting bigger. And that's what a lot of people loved about Hubbard, the early Hubbard. Just the guy who called himself Ron. Call me Ron. I'm a guy just like you are. That's the early Hubbard. The later Hubbard was the Commodore, and if you cross my path, I'll have you put in the chain locker, or thrown overboard, or your reputation destroyed. But the early Hubbard was like, don't forget, people, I'm a human being, just like you. Don't make me a god. Don't do any of those things. I'm just a guy with a case like you, and so forth. Don't forget that. That was 1952 Hubbard. All right, so let's say that you've helped a person with the pleasure moments, and you want to go to the next step of Dianetics. Well, that means you're on the road to those really heavy experiences called Engrams. But before that, there's an item called, in Dianetics terminology, it's called a lock. And a lock simply means a time when one of these big engrams of pain, unconsciousness, it's just a time when one of those experiences somehow got restimulated or brought into effect on the person for a greater or lesser period. So like if I had a bad hospital experience, now whenever I get near a hospital, I feel queasy, I feel afraid of going in, I don't want to go near doctors. That's a lock. It's a moment when the original experience that I had in the hospital, which was terrible, a botched surgery, the anesthetic didn't go well, I almost died, I barely got out with my life. So now, when I get near a hospital, I feel funny. I go to visit a friend, I get sick in the hospital. I can't go near them. Each time I do that, I'm having what's called, in Dianetics, a lock, which simply means something in the environment reminded me of something in one of those subconscious engrams. So what you can do is you can find all the particular locks for a certain type of engram. In other words, all the times that that engram has been keyed in or restimulated. And you can go to the earliest time that such a thing occurred and have the person scan through and go through these and touch upon all of them until finally they, instead of being key in, they key out. Because he's looked at them, he's re-experienced some of them, so on and so forth. And so when that happens, the person is now free, at least temporarily, from the influence that was underneath all of this, called the engram. Hope you understand that. It's like if you've ever had a bad experience swimming and you almost drowned, you say, boy, don't take me near water again. But you get yourself involved in a situation where somebody throws you in a swimming pool, or you decide you're going to wade and a big wave comes up, or somehow you're forced by being in the Navy or the Army or something to go near water. Well, each time you are, that experience of being almost drowned gets restimulated or keyed in, and that's the lock. That's all a lock is. And lock scanning will key out or destimulate or cause engrams to become quiet, so they aren't influencing you. And that's a good thing, because I feel like, boy, I feel a lot of relief. Yeah, so you can do lock scanning. You can lock scan anything. You can lock scan pleasure moments. You can lock scan the first time someone had indigestion. You can lock scan just about anything, pleasure or pain. Okay, so that's stage 2 of Dianetics. Stage 3 is what we call a secondary engram. And these are very important to address, because these are moments usually of loss and shock. They aren't necessarily unconscious. They aren't necessarily physical pain, but they're moments of tremendous emotional shock and upset, like you suddenly found that someone that you loved dies, or you lose your job that you're depending on. The loss of a loved one, though, is very important. Or your favorite pet dies, or you get some kind of terrible news about something. So you go to a funeral or of a person that you knew very well, or some kind of catastrophe occurs. Could be a flood, an earthquake, but for you it's an emotional shock. You're discovered cheating on a test, and as a result you don't graduate from school. It could be anything that causes a shocking emotional experience, usually with grief, upset, mental and emotional pain, etc., etc. Now, so it's very important to locate one of these experiences. It still bothers the person to say, I can never think of what happened to my blank without feeling terrible. You want to take that experience and do the same thing with it that you did with the pleasure moment. You want the person to recall it. You want the person to relive it. And you want them, maybe when they first relive it, they're filled with grief and shock and pain and horror and all kinds of things, but you help them to go through it from the beginning to the end. They say, oh, I can't stand it, I can't do that again. Now let's go to the beginning. Let's go a little bit before the beginning and see what you were doing before that. Okay, now let's catch the exact moment when you got the bad news, and then through the experience again. And by repetition, simply by repetition, the emotional value and the shock value of the experience starts to leave. You can even have the person go through it backwards. You can have the person enlarge the experience. You can have them do all kinds of things with it, and eventually bring them up from, say, grief, bring them up to different tone levels, such as anger, like that bastard shouldn't have died and left me with nothing. Anger, to boredom, conservatism. It's even possible to take the most horrifying loss in a person's life and bring them to the point where they're actually laughing about it. Now that may seem, I never wanted to feel any different about, the guy ends up, he's laughing about this terrible thing. It was like, well, death, life, so what? So he recovers, and when you see this person, if you've successfully done this with them, they will look, no exaggeration, they'll look years and years younger. I've seen a young woman come in who looked old and serious and so forth, who had lost her husband in World War II in some terrible battle, And she was pregnant at the time, they had other children, and she decided I can never go on, I don't know how I live, and it's written in her face. She's perhaps a woman in her 30s, but she looks 50 or 60, but by getting these experiences of loss and erasing them and lightening them up and freeing her from the fact that this experience became fixed in her subconscious mind, when she's all through, you're looking at another person. She looks young and vibrant and alive again, and you found out that she made a decision at that time that she couldn't live a good life ever again. And she became aware of making that decision that was affecting the rest of her life. And by finding this experience, and you'll find people at gravesite and all kinds of things connected with loss, making decisions about life that have influenced their life and living this. And if you look for and recover these and get the person aware that, oh yeah, I decided I'd never be happy again. For goodness sakes, that darn decision has been affecting me for the last 25 years. Sure enough, I remember now thinking, when I got that telegram from the War Department, my life is over, I'll never be happy again. So you got to really look for that when you're dealing, because these are the types of experiences that cause people to make decisions about life, which they then forget about, but which influence their life from then on. Now you're dealing with thought, the power of thought. Now you're dealing with the basic beingness of mankind that has the power to think and unthink, the power to create reality and uncreate it, and you're dealing sort of with one of the basic abilities of a human being is to do this. And they can do it to their detriment by not realizing during moments of great stress, great shock, great loss, that they've made decisions, formed opinions, reached conclusions that are now influencing their lives horribly. If you could just go to those with a person, just say, well, tell me some decision or conclusion you made that's completely screwing you up. You wouldn't have to do Dianetics then. And you may run across a person you can do that with. If you find such a soul, you're dealing with the stuff that makes these experiences so important. Okay, third level of experience is the engram itself. And this could be considered the most serious because this is an experience that has unconsciousness in it. Like somebody hit you over the head with a rock, or when you were being born, the doctor grabbed your skull with forceps and squeezed them so hard that the little baby body became unconscious. Or, anything. You fainted, you got punched in the jaw, you took a drug and you had a convulsion and went unconscious, or you fell off the wall like Humpty Dumpty and broke your head. These are engrams, and they aren't things that are remembered consciously. And in them is the whole experience, because the organism, called the human body, is built in such a way that anything that harms it, it makes minute, perfect recordings of it in the hopes that having this recording, it will steer the person or the animal away from any experience that would repeat it. Now that works for ordinary animals beautifully. For human beings, it doesn't work the same way. It does to some degree. So when you get into an engram, you're going to find a person encountering what really happened to them, like years ago. For example, I worked with a fellow who will go unmentioned, who was a famous sports star, and he got into an incident driving his car where he ran into a tree, knocked himself unconscious, destroyed the car, broke his arm, did a whole bunch of things, and didn't really remember it, except to say, well, I remember waking up in the hospital, and I know I was driving home, but between then and the hospital, I don't remember anything. Trouble was that as the years went by, that experience was affecting his sports ability so much that he was close to being retired and fired from the team that he worked on. Well, to make a long story short, we went back to that experience, and one of the things he found out was that when he was in the ambulance, unconscious, being taken to the hospital, there were two attendants in the ambulance talking about it, and one of them was saying something on the order of, "That poor bastard will never throw another football again." But our star didn't know that, and didn't know that that was now embedded in his consciousness as an idea. Anyway, we'll complete the story by saying we recovered the experience enough for him to remember the incident in the ambulance, which was like a giant revelation. And then, just to really fix up the rest of the experience, which you want to do when you're running an Engram, maybe it's the last thing you do, I had him say, "Well, where were you going in your car when the accident occurred?" He said, "I was going home, and the next thing I know, I see this big oak tree coming at me." And after that, it was all blank. So I said, "Okay, I want you to imagine you're in the car heading for the oak tree." He's like, "Really? Oh, okay. All right, here I go." And I said, "Now, when you hit the oak tree, I want you to drive the car right through it and keep going. I don't want the oak tree to stop you this time." So he said, "Okay." So there was a long period of silence, and then I see this great big grin and laughing occurring, and I remain silent, and ear to ear, pink, happy. I said, "Well, what's been happening?" He said, I drove through that goddamn tree, and the next thing you knew, I was up in the air, floating around, looking down at the university, looking down at California, looking down at the whole universe, and just feeling totally free." Thank you. That's the end of that. Okay, so that would be the end of that session. And of course, you don't want to do any more with the person you're working with. You want them to have that win tremendously. And, you know, you may say a few words, and they may thanks, that was feeling great. And are you going to be able to drive? Yo, I can drive, I'm okay. And that's it. And you don't bother that person about anything after that. You'll probably see them again sometime. But those are some of the things that are possible with Dianetics. Even when you're doing pleasure moments, the person may think, "What's happening?" Well, this isn't a pleasure moment. And they'll tell you about something, and they'll understand something, and you can just listen and understand that and go back to pleasure moments. So these are sort of things you can do. And so Dianetics, L. Ron Hubbard, 1950 was the beginning of it. And it's a very useful and simple tool. It's easy to teach people to do it, and you can do it even for yourself. And so when you're thinking about L. Ron Hubbard and you're thinking about what he's done, and think about Dianetics and the early Hubbard and what can be done with it. And at that point, we're going to take another break and end of session. Thank you.